Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Determination, Deliberation, and Dragons, a creative writing podcast where we talk about creative writing in whatever form we want, really, with determination and deliberation and dragons. So today, um, we are joined by a special guest, Andy, my Quidditch captain, guy who taught me how to be a keeper and soon to be creative writing master's student. So that's super exciting. He's gonna have a lot to tell us. And first in that line of telling us things, we have some questions for him. So Andy, we're gonna just ask you all these questions one by one, and feel free to respond with however much information you want.
My body is
So
ready.
okay, so just your name and pronouns for everyone.
Yes, my name is Andy Rutherford. Pronouns he, him. I I am known at work as Andy N. Rutherford because of a clerical error, but you can just call me Andy.
Okay. What is your favorite book?
Book or book series? Is that a separate question or
Oh, we're gonna ask book series next. We need everything.
single book is definitely harder for me because it's much easier to be like, oh, I like that whole series. If I had to be like pinned down to like just a book and because rather than a whole continuous series, which is sort of a separate category for me, I would have to say, keeping nostalgia factors out, I would have to say American Gods. I will say final answer is American Gods for favorite single book.
Okay. Now favorite book series.
Okay, this one is much easier because I have a set series for this. So it is a series that I know that Peter would greatly dislike, but it is the First Law trilogy. It is a perfect deconstruction of fantasy tropes, and it is the only sort of like grimdark series that like not the only, but one of the few grimdark series that really justifies itself as grimdark, and every bit of like the sort of the dark edginess that is so terrible and empty and meaningless in most series means a lot more because it's all about like geopolitics and like and it's a subversion of the idea of like the noble quest, which is sort of taken in context is sort of like when politicians say, "Oh boy, we are on a noble quest to defeat evil," they're almost always trying to do something that is either equally evil or just morally compromised in some sense, and it uses fantasy to comment on real life and real life to sort of comment on fantasy. So I have a much better prepared answer for that particular one.
That sounds
What was
amazing.
the
First Law series, you said?
First Law trilogy, yes.
Okay.
first Law trilogy? Okay.
Yes, it's by
And
Joe
then
Abercrombie. Yeah, it's very dark. Again, I do not think Peter would be into it, but maybe they would. I don't know. I have not checked with them for a while.
The premise sounds
the
super
answer is
interesting,
no.
but I don't like dark stuff. So we'll see. I might try it. Okay. Now your favorite author.
I feel like I should cover for the fact that I did not say this person for my favorite book or favorite series because I can't truly say that the Broken Earth trilogy is like my favorite trilogy. First off, because I'm still finishing the third book, but second off, because it is unrelentingly sad. Izzy is nodding, so I imagine she has also read these books.
The first book was our common reading for first year in college.
Yes, so I'm going to say N.K. Jemisin because she is brilliant and did the people talk about Brandon Sanderson as being like the guy for magic systems, for hard magic systems, and that's true to a large extent. But like, if I were to say who wrote the best magic system, it would be N.K. Jemisin. If I were to, and she also does characters in a way that is not just complex but also blows my mind with its like nail dragging realism, and it just those books hurt me inside. So I can't say they're my favorites because I feel pain just having to work my way through them, but at the same time they're brilliant and extraordinarily well written and probably deserve to be my favorite books if I was not a softie. But I am. They're way harder to read than First Law trilogy, which is also dark but not nearly as heartbreaking as but yeah, that's my thing.
I could not read I read the first one. It was very good. I could not read the next ones.
Yes, understandable.
Okay, so now the most important question, your favorite dragon. And this can be like
Hmm.
whatever, however you want to interpret that. You're like a species, an individual, a character.
Yeah, that's a good question. And appropriate for this podcast. I grew up on the Spyro games, Spyro the
Mm,
Purple Dragon. I'm gonna say Spyro. Not from the like follow-up Spyro series, the reboot, which I sort of enjoyed, but was very on in a lot of ways. I'm gonna say the Spyro from the original trilogy of games because I like purple and he's pretty cute, and I enjoyed those games.
perfect. We always love a good, cute dragon. So, moving on, just a fun fact about yourself.
Fun fact about myself. I feel like this is a future plug, because as Peter mentioned earlier, I'm going to get a master's in creative writing. And I did NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, in 2020 during the heart of the pandemic. And I started a novel, which I am planning to finish and eventually publish. So my fun fact about myself is that I am writing a book.
That's awesome. I want to talk about that later. And so the last question that we'll ask you, why do you like writing in stories?
Oh, man, that is like asking me why do I enjoy food or breathing or like it's and I just finished applying to as the creative writing programs, and that was sort of hell. But the one thing that was incredibly easy was they all ask for a statement of purpose, and like the first two paragraphs of all of them are all the same. It's all just my story of like being, you know, a baby, being 7, and reading the Aragon. Did you guys did either of you read those books?
Yep.
Um,
No.
yeah. So like they're not very good. Um, they were written by a 15-year-old and they're incredibly impressive for something written by a 15-year-old. I don't want to hate on Christopher Plony. I also wouldn't want to go on any kind of thing and hate on someone's hard work on something. But like, they were written by a 15-year-old. And it's the hero gets the hot elf lady. Um, so like from that moment on, I was like have been reading and sort of like playing pretend in my mind, and sort of like, everybody else stopped playing pretend at the age of like 10 or whatever, and I didn't stop. I just kept going in my brain. And so, I've been a storyteller for ages, and I just and in college I'm like, well, you know I'm never going to make money off of this, so I'm going to do political science and then become a lawyer. And I got out of college and I started being a paralegal, and I'm like, wow, I am miserable. I am not enjoying this work at all. And this is not fulfilling me as a person, so I'm going to take a step back and try and do something that is so in my blood and so in my heart that like it's sort of I have to do this because it's who I am. So if I fail and being a writer is unsuccessful, then I will move on to something that will be less fulfilling in life. But I will keep on, telling stories and doing my thing on the side regardless.
Yeah, I mean that sounds amazing, and I definitely have like so much faith in you succeeding in this, and I'm very excited to hear what happens and how everything goes. But moving on from our interrogation, now that everyone knows who you are, you are known. We're gonna talk a little bit about the TV show She-Ra, which
Woo!
Izzy and Andy both know really well. I've dabbled in it. I have seen it.
I would put a caveat on how well I know it. I've watched it through one time. So if I misremember something, that's on me.
I have watched through it 2 times, and then because I knew I was going to be doing this, decided to like sort of watch back through some of the key episodes and take notes on those episodes and sort of like the character development moments. So perhaps my knowledge is the best, but I'm sure Izzy's passion is equal to my own. Man, it's a fantastic show.
Yeah, I mean Izzy certainly loves it. I
Now,
think I have seen it through like the whole show, but most of my knowledge just comes from like rewatching clips on YouTube of like the same scenes with Catra and Adora.
Yeah.
The plan then is, so Andy, you have notes, and we'll basically just talk about whatever ideas you have and like respond to that, if that sounds good with both of you.
Yeah. Hearing
Sure.
myself talk sounds great. Yeah. So.
Did you have a particular theme or topic, or just?
Yeah. So, I was like, okay, we're going to talk about themes when we start. When you guys asked me what I wanted to talk about, and so I set out to take notes on that, and I'm like, well, like there are a million videos and a million topics about like the characters of Catra and Adora, so I don't really want to like do that specifically. But the more I like got into the themes, the more I'm like, man, I can't talk about this without also talking about the characters, because they're so closely interwoven with the themes, that I'm like, might as well do a bit that's also about Catra and Adora, but sort of does try to move beyond just like, oh my god, these characters are great, and I love them. So I actually I went super nerd, and I thought that perhaps we could start with a quote from Kurt Vonnegut, which is less nerd and more just like slightly esoteric. If that's okay with you both.
Go for it. I don't know anything, well, I haven't read anything by him.
Yeah, so Kurt Vonnegut was in World War II. He was a soldier in World War II, and he was present for the bombing of Dresden. And we sort of like, especially in the United States, we like to think of World War II as sort of the just war. Like, if you want to point and say war can be good, we're like, oh, well, you got to defeat Nazis, right? Like, that's, if you're not defeating Nazis, then what are you doing? That's why we need the military. That's why we need war. But Vonnegut lived through the bombing of Dresden, which was this horrific, crime against humanity. I think war crime that was never, no one, I don't think, was prosecuted for that. I don't know the history, so don't at me if I'm wrong about that. But Vonnegut was there for the sort of the darker side of World War II, and was there for the bombing of Dresden. And he was a comedy writer, but in his book Slaughterhouse-Five, he took on some very serious topics, and the topics of war. And I swear this is I imagine Izzy and Peter are just like, what? Why did we bring this guy on to talk about Kurt Vonnegut, which has nothing to do with She-Ra. But the She-Ra is in large part about roles and about love and about like rejecting your role in a sort of like an imperialist organization, and in favor of moving on to sort of trying to get beyond those things. So I think a lot about this Vonnegut quote when I think about She-Ra, which is, I have told my sons that they are not under any circumstances to take part in massacres, and that the news of massacres of enemies is not to fill them with satisfaction or glee. I have also told them not to work for companies which make massacre machinery, and to express contempt for people who think that we need machinery like that. That's from Slaughterhouse-Five. And there's this ongoing theme in She-Ra of characters who are, a part of the evil horde, this organization of sort of this imperialists trying to take over the planet of Etheria, and characters slowly coming for one reason or another to reject their roles in that organization. So I find I find a connection in that it's, the message is also about love, and that's the second theme that I want to talk about. It's about rejecting your roles or defining yourself in your roles, and trying to figure out who you are in the role that you have to play. But it's that sort of goes hand in hand with the concept of love and of loving relationships and of finding yourself through love. Which is the other half that has less to do with Vonnegut. So that's my sort of pretentious opening. Izzy, I guess what is your relationship with the show? I guess, and I guess Peter also. But I guess Like, where do you come for? What is it that you guys or like about the show or so much?
I mean, I love fantasy animated TV shows, so I came initially being like, let's watch this for, you know, adventure and fun, and then also watching it realizing, oh wow, this is a very queer show, and this is some of the first, semi-open, it's like more, well, it's hard to say whether it's subtext or just like, open in a way that other shows aren't necessarily open. Like to say it's just subtext feels like inaccurate, but it's more open about like queerness existing in still a not quite like verbal way per se, but like open in like showing it,
Right.
sort of. I don't have the words to describe it that well.
Sort of the opposite of
Showing
Dumbledore
but
and
not
Grindelwald
telling.
in Fantastic Beasts.
Yeah. It's
So
like, Sergey,
far,
did you see
so
that
far.
single thing that happened? I came to it for the representation, but most importantly for the friend. And I'm a big fan of the fantasy adventure quest.
Yes. Yeah, yes, I think that's also that's a big draw for people. Um, and I also enjoyed it, and I enjoyed introducing it to a lot of my queer friends, and I think my friend Gray, who Peter definitely knows. I don't know if Izzy knew Gray at Vassar,
No.
um, but he watched it and he was just like, man, watching this, I really want to be a lesbian right now. Um, yeah, I think that's definitely it's written and even like beyond the text and the writing of it, like it's written like and it's drawn in a style that sort of evokes. You can definitely tell that Adora is like if you could look at a picture and be like, show me what a lesbian is without telling me someone is a lesbian, and I'm like Adora in She-Ra form or Huntara. Um, and I'm like, yeah, look at those muscles. Yeah, so I love that about the show also. Anyways, back to the notes, which I guess are running the conversation. So the show begins
Did
with.
Peter want to share their
Oh, right,
relationship to the
sorry,
show?
Peter.
I mean, I don't have a huge relationship to it. It was just like I I was bored on YouTube and I started just seeing clips of it. I thought it was super funny, and then like I think just the connection to Star Wars became like super apparent to me. And the way that I describe it now is like, I mean, it very much is similar to Star Wars, but like fairy princesses, which is like super cool and awesome. And it explores a lot of things that Star Wars, I think, just doesn't. Like, it has no interest in exploring, and it tends to avoid it. Um, Although, like, a lot of the issues around like imperialism are, certainly just the same issues. I just think that Shira often has like an interesting take that Star Wars maybe sometimes tries to hit on, but sometimes like fails. So I think that is just like comparing the two of them, and like I love Star Wars, um, so I think like that connection really just made me enjoy Shira like even more. Like even there's one part, I don't think it's like the actual ships, but it's like when Hordak is like telling you how he got stuck on Etheria, and there's like these kind of stylized like representation of the Horde ships, and they're triangles, which is just Star Destroyers. It's like even the imagery is like they're not trying to hide that the Horde is very much just like the Empire in their goals of like conquering planets and turning everything into like this homogenous like technological kind of organization, all led by Emperor Palpatine, of course. So Horde Prime. So that, I mean, that's most of my relationship to the show, I think.
Dope. Yeah, yeah. I think I definitely agree with you Until you were talking, I'm like, is it really Star Wars? And like, no, yeah, it kind of is, because Horde of the Palpatine of the show, and that everyone else in the show is a character, and Horde Prime is just a force of evil. And the Emperor isn't so much a character, so much he is just like the embodiment of evil and darkness and the dark side. Sheev Palpatine doesn't get so much characterization as he gets evil laughs.
Pretty much.
Instead of jumping to the beginning of the show, actually, let's start with a couple of fun facts, and truly just two. So you may or may not know that Princess Spinnerella is voiced by N.D. Stevenson, who is the writer of the show. And they guest starred on Critical Role in some capacity back in the day, which is connects us even more strongly to the fact that there's a D&D episode in season 2 called Just Roll With It, which is one of my favorite episodes because I love all things D&D, and I dungeon master in my spare time. And so it greatly endeared me to it, both in that episode and in like, oh, so this person, like they clearly also enjoy, or I think they have their own D&D podcast or D&D game beyond the Critical Role thing, but it's just sort of the collision of two things that I love is always warms my heart. So that is my fun facts about the show. Yes, so the show begins with with Adora, the main character, realizing, oops, I guess I didn't know it, but I was a part of this awful imperialist army. The Horde is actually the evil Horde. Didn't know that. Finding the Sword of Power, or the Sword of Protection, as it's sometimes called, realizing that she is She-Ra, and deciding to leave the Horde for the Princess Alliance and joining the side of good, which causes her best friend and eventual love interest, or ongoing love interest, is probably more accurate, Catra, to absolutely lose her marbles, and because Catra feels extremely abandoned as Adora leaves, and therefore in future, and as we start to see in flashbacks, Adora, wherever she goes, just is the golden child, and is the before she was She-Ra, she was destined to be Force Captain, was sort of the best fighter, and was very keenly, or not very keenly, and of greater importance to Catra, their sort of mutual adopted mother, or mother figure, Shadow Weaver, always favored Adora to an absurd degree, and that led to a certain amount of jealousy that Adora was sort of like purposefully blinded herself from. So Catra like rejects the side of good in favor of the Horde, both because she feels betrayed by Adora, who goes off and makes new friends, and the two of them sort of have divergent and yet parallel paths through the show, and that they're both trying to find who they are and trying to define themselves through their roles. And the end of that journey is spoiler, I guess, is a journey into love, and the end solution, and this is a massive oversimplification, is like the way that they sort of find comfort with themselves and find a role that really suits them, is they find not just each other in the romantic sense of love, but also just in the like they escape the sort of abusive relationship that they have with Shadow Weaver and the Horde and imperialism, which are all sort of empty concepts or self-harming concepts, into the sort of more fulfilling love and the friendship that they find in the Princess Alliance. So the themes, this is a very long way of saying, are about finding yourself and establishing yourself in your role. What roles do we reject? What roles do we accept? And the answer to that is ones have are ones that are based on real connections, real loving relationships. I would also like to say most of what I'm saying are my own thoughts. I also have watched many YouTube videos on the subject, video essays. I feel like I should give some sort of footnote on a couple of things to Overly Sarcastic Productions, the YouTube series, which is fantastic, and Take 5x5.
5x5 takes.
5x5 takes. Thank you very much. So again, that was my other extended intro. Do we have any thoughts of your own or anything? I feel like I should stop talking at some point, so it's not just one long Andy monologue.
Or I'm having so much fun listening to you.
Sorry, listeners, that this has become the Andy podcast for this episode. I swear I did not plan this. And to reconnect with the Vonnegut of it all is it's just like Adora rejects the role of the villain of member of the Horde, leaves her imperialist background behind, and in most stories that is the end of the character's arc of just like, oh, I have joined the good guys, and like maybe there are a couple episodes where it's sort of like, oh, I have to fit in with the good guys. But what's interesting about Adora's arc is that that's where she begins, but she is not done leaving the side of evil, quote unquote, even though she's on the side with the good guys the whole time, and even though she's never like remotely interested in the sort of in rejoining the Horde or anything. That's not what I mean when I mean she hasn't done. I mean that the role of She-Ra is also wrapped up in this other imperialist group called the First Ones, and it's sort of this, and it's a role that was originally belonged to Etheria, but sort of got co-opted into their empire, and into their sort of, and so she has to slowly figure out that She-Ra was like sort of reforged and remade into a weapon by the First Ones, and so later seasons are all about like the spoilers, Etheria is a Death Star. And she has the key to the Death Star, and she has to choose, like, oh, will I take up the tools of the oppressor to help us find our salvation, or will I reject that role? Will I use this horrible weapon to save us and its power? And certain other characters who I wish we had time for. I would love to get into Glimmer and her arc, which is equally fascinating but separate. And she has her own issue with being role and being queen and stuff. And so Adora ultimately rejects that role and now has to completely reinvent the identity of She-Ra, the identity of herself, like from square one. Like, oh, what does it mean to be the hero? Am I a hero? Like, did any of that mean anything, or was I just a piece in a puzzle? And she eventually, like in season 5, regains the power of She-Ra without the sword. After she broke the sword, the piece of First One tech that they tied to the character of She-Ra, she breaks the sword and becomes She-Ra in her own right, with under her own powers. And each time that she sort of begins to regain the power of She-Ra, it's always about protecting or saving her friends. It's always about a love relationship that she has. And, she like makes her largest stride with the other main character, Catra, when she has to rescue in the episode Save the Cat, which is a great episode name from season 5, where she enters Horde Prime's, Star Destroyer to rescue Catra and save her from being mind controlled. And she ultimately like jump starts, although she doesn't complete that complete character arc, by like being like, no, I am here to protect Catra. I'm here to help and save my friends. It's about those relationships that allow her to regain the power of She-Ra. Likewise, the character of Catra, who is sort of a foil to her, there's the word I've been looking for, foil, begins the show being rejected by Adora, and she has a very complex relationship with, again, their mutual mother figure, Shadow Weaver, who always favored Adora, always gave her love and always blamed Catra whenever things went wrong. There's an episode in season 1, episode 11, that I have like 5 notes from here alone, where they're like seeing their backstories, and there's a bunch of notes I could give you on that, but the moment that really struck me in that episode more than anything else is because Adora would do something good and get praise, and Catra would do something good and get nothing, or Adora would do something bad and get nothing, and Catra would do something bad and she would get punished. But there's this moment when the two of them are battling robots together because they're forced to take sides with each other, villain and hero united, and Catra uses her intelligence and her dexterity and her skills to to pull out a bunch of the robot's wires, and she has it almost dead, and she's like, yeah, I am Catra, I am strong, I am powerful, and she gets to feel good about herself for a moment. And Adora, who's battling robots over there, comes in and does a complete kill steal, kills the robot by using just brute force, just slams it with her sword. And you see that she just wins because she is strong, because she is the chosen one, because she is special. And to Catra, who her whole life has been, deeply in love with Adora, but at the same time deeply jealous of her because Adora has a destiny, because Adora is special from day one. Adora has, always gets love. Adora gets friends. Adora gets everything. And Catra just gets rejection over and over and over again. And doesn't get to be seen for her worth. And again, that relationship is fascinating to read and to get into. But so Catra's role is slowly trying to become Force Captain and then become leader of the Horde after he finds out that Hordak has no idea what he's doing, and is not nearly the Dark Lord he has spun himself as. He is basically just an inventor who got caught up in imperialist ideas and would be much happier if he could just build robots in his spare times. He has his own fantastic arc about roles where he discovers that all he really wants is to be loved and valued, and then Trapta has the great bit about your flaws are what make you perfect. Anyways, sorry, I don't want to. I should stick on task. But for me, Catra, her arc is she slowly tries to get power and tries to find fulfillment in in power and in the sort of imperialist ideology and in the Horde. But in doing so, she begins to act more and more selfishly, more and more like Shadow Weaver, begins to take on the sort of abusive qualities that were done to her, which is also how the show is about generational trauma. And she goes to the dark side and begins to push all of her friends away, pushes away, her friend Lonnie, Kyle, poor Kyle, Rogelio, and Scorpia. Oh, bless Scorpia. The fact that I haven't said anything about Scorpia so far is a crime. Love Scorpia. And if I had 2 more hours to talk about this, there would be half an hour just on how cool Scorpia is. And even the most loyal friend you could possibly have, even Scorpia, who is also kind of in love with her, even she gets pushed out and pushed away. And in season 5, in the last season, Catra finds herself completely alone and friendless, and she realizes the role she wanted to take on is ultimately empty. And it's not until the end of season 5 when Adora comes to rescue her, and all the princesses start accepting her and showing her, true love and friendship, as we like to value. That she begins to reject the role of Force Captain, begins to reject those ideologies she grew up with, and makes her way into love.
So Andy had your monologue.
Yes.
That was great. I guess I want to know, I have a few thoughts about some of the stuff you said. I'm sure, Izzy, you have a lot of things that you want to say too. So I'm gonna let you talk first, Izzy. Do you have any like just in response to Andy's ideas and notes?
Diatribe, one might say.
Yes.
Oh no, I was
Harangue.
hoping you would go first so I could think of something.
Oh, I can try. I mean, I'm curious too because I mean, Andy, your thoughts about just like the sword and the idea of it being like this sort of power. I know you also called it like the sword of protection, which I didn't remember. At the end of the day, like, yes, she does kind of reject the Horde's form of imperialism and like ultimately the first ones. And I think as someone who's less familiar with the show, like the first ones is really intriguing but like more confusing to me and how that works. But just this idea of like power and what people do with that. And I mean, power is something that we talk about in geography like all the time. And the idea that this sword is like the sword of power. And you can literally see, like, I think She-Ra is the princess of power. And like with her, like all the princesses can do like all these crazy things, which usually involves them like shooting a giant rainbow and like killing all the robots. Um, so I'm just like curious what you make of the fact that like she leaves the Horde and ultimately takes on this power. And I mean, you talked about like what she does with it towards the end, but yeah, I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think I tended to think of it in terms of just like like the super weapon. They were weaponizing the power of magic as like this, as a Death Star. But I think you're right in that it's literally called the Sword of Power. It's a sort of a one ring, like a little bit. It's sort of the one ring thing of the like, oh, power corrupts, and power is power, no matter whose hands it's in. Um, and I guess like it's and that's sort of the discussion of a lot of the especially season 4, where we have Glimmer, who sort of starts to take on some like Catra-esque traits, and some of this sort of just like she starts to get very pragmatic, which there's nothing wrong with pragmatism, but she starts to get like sort of push more and more for more drastic solutions. um, and I think that it's definitely in the difference of sort of like Adora leaves the Horde and leaves that form of imperialism, but then has to figure out like, okay, I have this sword, which is a weapon at the end of the day, which is to defend maybe, but also like how do I use it? To what extent do I use it? And that's the sort of conflict of it. And I think that again, where it lands in season 5 is on the sort of like the role of She-Ra is not to be a weapon. That's the fact that it was the sword of power that was the core of She-Ra. Is a first one's idea. She-Ra is, as much as she is a defender, also a healer. And also her role is to protect her friends and to, like be a magical princess who makes the world better by, being sparkly and showing love to the people around her. And maybe there is some role, again, I feel like I should reference at this point the Stormlight archives, where there's this sort of which I don't know if either of you have seen or read.
Nope.
Okay, there's this whole bit in there where the main character is like he's a soldier, and he thinks of being a soldier as being a protector, and his father, who's an ardent pacifist, and there's a whole book where there's a conflict between the two of them over whether there can be any good that can come from being a soldier. And I feel like the show learns slightly on like, well, yeah, you do have to fight Nazis, maybe, but really your role should be if you're going to use power, if you're going to have power, that should not be the main use of it. If that at all answers your question, Peter.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's definitely like a complicated thing, and I think like I mean, we were just talking about Dave Filoni a moment ago. I think that's not in the actual recording because that was before I started recording. But he's the guy who was like the director of the Clone Wars TV show in Star Wars, and
I
he
saw a meme at some point which was like the Ron Swanson goes into Home Depot and they're just like, I need help, and he's just like, I know how to use this better than you. He's that guy for Star Wars.
yeah, pretty much. but he made a controversial comment in the Star Wars fandom community like a while back where he was like, "Oh, Star Wars." I don't know if it was him or it was like just Disney in general, but I kind of attribute it to him. And like he's talked about this before about like Star Wars being at its core like an anti-war story, even though Star Wars is in the name. And like you see, I mean, on the face of it, you're like, wait, but like what? Like Luke Skywalker's going blowing up Death Stars, but this idea of like sure fighting is like necessary sometimes, but like that's ultimately like Luke isn't sitting on his home planet of Tatooine like necessarily dreaming about being a warrior. I mean, maybe he is at first, but he kind of grows out of that and he realizes like like yes, I fight, but it isn't something that I like aspire to do all the time. Like it's not the fighting that makes me the person I am, it's the protecting the people.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I kind of see I think your response to like Shira and like made me think of that in a way. Whereas like it's yes, she has like this incredible like awesome power and like yeah, she's just like this superhero type person, but definitely the way in which she uses her powers to do like the healing, which I mean I think the show kind of focuses less on that from what I remember, and I could be totally wrong about that.
There are a
Um,
few instances where it's just like she heals the gate in season one, the sea gate, and
hmm,
she helps heal plants. Although that's more Perfuma in that episode. They tend to back away from it more, but I think you're mostly right in that there are examples, but it's like and I guess the very end of season five where she uses it to reject rather than like she uses Etheria to sort of reject the corruption that Horde Prime is bringing on it, which isn't so much an act of aggression in my mind, so much as it is sort of just like getting rid of or I guess well maybe it's an act of aggression. I'd have to rewatch the episode, but I tend to think of that particular bit as more of healing than aggression. But continue.
yeah, no, I think you're right about that. And that kind of just like I mean makes me also think about the idea of like accepting roles and whatnot. And I mean that's like very much the final episode, two episodes, and you see like Catra continuously like talk to Adora like, oh, like are you just doing this to for like Shadow Weaver? Is this something that you actually want to do? And I mean, I'm just curious ultimately like your interpretation of do you think that Shira like Adora goes and does whatever she does with like the core of Etheria to like stop the super weapon, is that ultimately like her choice? Do you think that's something that she chooses to do? Or is that still because definitely like Catra, I mean part of her like, oh Adora, like do like the thing that you want to do, what's best for you, was to try to get her to like not potentially sacrifice herself. And Adora ends up going the route of like potentially sacrificing herself and risking herself for everyone. And we see Catra like Catra comes back. I'm not sure if I totally bought that like Catra thought that Adora was doing it for Adora. I think it gets like a little bit kind of just like messy in how we can interpret it a little bit. I was curious like what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, I would want to rewatch the episode, but
Hmm.
my memory of this is that, and that was actually I was rewatching right up until the last minute when we were about to record, and I was going through key episodes, and I didn't quite get to the finale again. But my memory is that Adora goes off to be a hero because in part because of the sort of like the guilt that Adora has and the sort of hero complex that she has. She's like, okay, I'm going to go save the planet. I'm going to sacrifice myself. Ultimately, she has some of the same issues that Catra has because of their screwed up upbringing. Thanks, evil mom. And she and Catra like runs back to her as Adora is sacrificing herself, but Adora just sacrificing herself isn't working. Doesn't save the planet. It's only when Catra runs to her. It's only when the two of them. It's only when Catra says, "Hey, I love you, stupid. Don't kill yourself over this. You're too valuable. You mean too much." It's only when she makes that again. connection, move into love, move into a loving relationship, not into an empty sacrifice, or an empty idea of heroism, but a mutual connection. That's what saves the planet. It's not, and that's what allows her to do the thing, to empower the Etheria to reject the corruption. So my thought on the finale is that it's not so much her sacrifice as it is her moving back into humanity and back into love, and finding her self-love and her love of Catra at the same time. Hashtag love wins. I'm throwing around the word love a lot, like it doesn't mean much, but I think it really does. And I think that if the show communicates anything to me very well, it's the value of love, and it's a little Harry Potter-esque, except that I think it does it better than Harry Potter in some places.
Oh, I have so many thoughts on that. She-Ra's so much better.
Yeah, but like it's sort of just like no, and it's like this was another, I think, 5x5 video of just like, no, love is cool actually. Love actually can make us better, and should be the end goal. And yeah, so it's not it's lesbians save the world is the headline of the previous episode, rather than Adora saves the world. It's their love save the world. That's my response.
Yeah. So Izzy, has that been enough time for you to come up with some thoughts?
No, I am thoroughly absorbing everything you're saying, Andy. Very much appreciating. I watched some analysis videos back when the finale came out, but this feels like I'm having my own mini analysis video.
I mean, yeah, listeners, like Andy is super smart, and this was basically what college was like with him, just listening to. I mean, we had like some debates about other stuff too, but just like listening to you talk and like your ideas about these stories is just like super fascinating.
Yeah, man. I mean, I did say this on screen. Like, yeah, stories are in my blood. I'm like, I can sound pretty cool when I talk about stories, but then people ask me questions about like real life things, and I'm like, this is not my area of specialty.
Thank you so much, Andy. Those thoughts were super interesting. I had a great time listening to them, and I hope you also had a great time, listeners. This will be the close of our episode for now. Not much, again, with the conclusion being not so much of a conclusion, but I hope this gets you thinking, and maybe if you haven't watched She-Ra, gets you watching She-Ra, or maybe rewatching if you are so inclined.
Watch it. It's great.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Andy, for joining us. We really appreciated talking with you.
I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you. And check out our Patreon, listeners. We've got it in the link in the episode description. And we really appreciate everything that you guys do. And yep, this was a great episode. Thank you, Andy, for coming on.
Good to be here.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Go for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
To the notes.